All right, today we're going to talk about making a budget. How do you make a budget? Why is it important to have a budget? One of the things I find when I talk to many people about personal finances is they don't really know what they spend in certain areas. I've had conversations with people where they say, I don't know where my money's going. And I say, well, how much do you spend on groceries and eating out? Because those are two areas where you can end up spending a lot of money. They didn't know. And one of the things I do is once a month, I look through my credit card statement and my bank statement and I categorize everything. So if you ask me, how much did I spend eating out in September of 2020? I don't remember the number, but I know exactly where to go and look for it. And I think that this is a really important thing. But you also need to know, what is it okay to spend? So let's dig into a couple of the ideas here. And I am not going to use a lot of percentages for what it's okay to spend on particular items. And I'm going to tell you why in a moment. But let's start with maybe the most important thing. You have to know what is your post-tax income. I see lots of people say, I should be able to spend X because I make 80 grand. And my handwriting is such a mess here that it's not going to help the entire thing at all. Let's see if we can, there we go, income. Post-tax, you need to know how much money you actually have. So whatever amount you make sure you know what you're actually taking home. If you're paid every 2 weeks, understand that that's not your monthly salary, because when you're paid every 2 weeks, twice a year, there are 3 paychecks that you get. So anyway, once you figure out what you make per month, let's just keep it really, really simple to make the math easy. Let's say it's $5,000. Great. This is the amount that you have to work with. Now, there's 2 ways that you can deal with this. You can work forwards or you can work backwards. To work backwards would be to say, here are the percentages above which I don't want to spend in different categories, and then figure out what's the most I can spend. I tend not to like that for a couple reasons. One being that a lot of those rules of thumb really only apply to a narrow part of the economy. Sometimes you'll hear, well, your rent or mortgage plus condo fee and or renter's insurance or whatever, it should be no more than a third of your income. And unfortunately, the reality is, in some parts of the country, for people with average incomes, you just can't do that. In New York City, it's very common that people working reasonable jobs who live in one of the expensive neighborhoods, which is most of them, are spending 45 or 50% of their net income on housing. On the other hand, wealthier people, often spending a third of your income on housing, is way, way, way too much. You're going to overspend if you say, I can give myself that leeway. So I tend not to go that way. For me, the best first thing to do is to really kind of think of 2 categories. You've got sort of like your fixed, or we might call them mandatory expenditures. And then you have what is generally called discretionary. Discretionary means that it's at your discretion. Now, sometimes think about eating. Well, okay, eating is necessary, but at the same time, which grocery store you go to or how many meals you have at home versus out, those are things that are more discretionary. So generally speaking, what we have under fixed includes what we would call like our primary housing expense. So this would be like rent, or a mortgage, and then you might have insurance, utilities, etc. So it's a good idea to set some kind of number here. Health insurance would be something that falls under fixed. Health insurance might be through your work or might be not. We would include that there. Generally speaking, it's a good idea to include groceries here. Again, you can opt instead of groceries to be eating out, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. If you have a car, your car payment and car insurance, and we'll talk about that specifically as well. And then, I guess we would include gas under this as well. Medical bills, for example, would probably be here, although there is some fluctuation to that, etc. Okay, so anyway, you get the ideas of fixed are sort of the things that are month in and month out. On discretionary, it's a lot of other things. So we would call it like entertainment, eating out, clothes. Clothes is one that we might put a question mark by. Obviously, you need some clothes, but for a lot of people, once they're already established, clothes are mostly discretionary. Generally speaking, gifts. Now, if some of you are familiar with the term Jewish guilt, which is big in my family, you might say some of those gifts aren't feeling so discretionary. But anyway, that's mostly a joke. And then there is this kind of a third category. And I want to really consider these, I want to consider these fixed, but all sorts of savings and investment. I think it's a good idea to think about these really as fixed. So what you want to start to develop is some kind of general idea of what the totality of this is going to look like. Now, I think it's a really great idea to start with savings and investment. So you might say, I want to be saving 15% of my net income, which in our case here with the $5,000 a month would be $750. Now, where that goes is really a topic for a different video. We've talked about before. You would first say, well, I want to make sure I'm scooping up any matches from my employer. Then I want to do tax advantaged accounts. Okay, it's that. But the point would be you would sort of start with 750. And if you did that because you want to save that 15%, then what you're working with monthly would become 4,250. And I know people are going to say, David, a lot of people don't make this much. We're trying to just pick round numbers to make this realistic. Once you've got your 4,250, that is what you're working with. Now, my instinct, because of how I am, is I'd say I want to be saving much more than 750, but let's imagine we're not starting with that. So then you can start putting in some numbers and you would say, okay, based on the average rent and what I'm willing to pay, I want to try to keep my housing expense under $1,500. So that would put you, we'd have to figure out what that percentage is. And some of these aren't really your choice. If you have an employer plan, you might know, well, I contribute $150 a month. You might say, in general, I'm spending $150 a week in groceries. So that puts me at $600. My car payment is $350, probably too high. Okay. Medical bills, you might say on average, my copay is $20. On average, I have 2 medical appointments a month. So that's going to be $40. And you would kind of total all this up. So $1,650, $2,250, $2,600, $2,640. And we would say, great, all of this stuff together is $2,640. So we now are kind of building up this picture. We've got $2,640 for fixed. And then we've got our $750 for savings and investments. Again, the $750 might be, half cash and half retirement. That's a different topic. And then you would say, all right, well, what's going on with all of my discretionary? I want to allocate, doesn't mean you spend this, but I want to allocate $200 a month for gifts. Maybe you've got a big family, a lot of friends. For clothing, you like to get 2 items at, again, the numbers really don't matter. The point is the process. You would say, I'm going to allocate myself $100 a month. In reality, I'm going to spend $600 in the spring and $600 in the fall. It's still the same total. Okay, the idea is to get sort of an idea. Eating out, you really like eating out. Even though you're only spending $600 on groceries, you really want to splurge and you're going to spend $800 a month eating out. And you go to sporting event and whatever else the case may be, you've got a $300 entertainment budget. Fine. So now we've got this discretionary budget, which is looks like about $1,400. Great. So now we add that, $1,400 in discretionary. And we find that our total here is 13 and 7, 2, 3, 4, $4,790. That is really, really close to the $5,000 that we started with up here. So you're in the ballpark. Now, this is where it really is actually more interesting, which is to start looking at these things and saying, all right, well, I've got an extra 210 here. I'm just shy of my $5,000. If you're me, I'm putting that directly in savings and investment. Okay. So with that extra, we're now at 960 here on savings and investment. That's great. Do you really need a car that's $350 a month? Do you really need a car at all? Could you replace a $350 car with a $200 subway voucher or whatever the case may be? And then you free up another $100 that maybe you could add on clothing. Well, you can always look at reprioritizing, but the point here is you start with your post-tax income, you divide into fixed and discretionary. Now, you could email me and argue about every single one of these and say, David, you're wrong on car being fixed. Car really is discretionary. Well, it depends on your situation, depends where you live. David, this for someone making $5,000 take home, which probably means they're grossing like 85 grand, $750 a month is way too low. Well, I agree. If this were, or you could say that, if you make this in New York City, it's going to be very tough to do the 1,500. The point here is to get people thinking. The point is to get people thinking. Maybe it's really worth it to you to have a nicer than average place to live, and you want to sacrifice on eating out, and you can get a cheaper car. I also want to address the fact that a lot of people are going to say, David, this is completely unrealistic. You should really be doing this with someone making $28,000 and having to spend $1,000 a month on rent. And that's fine. I think that's absolutely true that millions and millions of people are in that situation. The point here is to do this in the way it's supposed to work. And then we look at other scenarios, which I'm glad to do. One other thing is people who aren't natural savers may want to consider automating some of these things. And so one thing that can be done is imagine that you have this 2640 that you've identified as fixed. There's 4.3 weeks per month. You would divide that and you would figure out whatever this works out to be. I don't know, 720 per week, or you would figure out how much this is per paycheck. And you might take that amount and automatically redirect it to what you might call like a bill pay account. Just have it come out all together. One other thing. What about something like a travel savings account? Where would you consider that? It really depends on you. You could say travel savings should go under discretionary. I think if you're more serious about that and you want to keep it separate from savings and investment, you're specifically saving for that, I would actually put it under savings and investment as a separate category. I would add it on to the 750, whether it's, $50 a month or whatever it is you want to contribute there. So these are the ideas. This is how you start thinking about this. And we're actually going to do a video where we look at someone who doesn't have these numbers. Where do you find the money to get to the end of the month? Unfortunately, a very common situation in the United States.